Hello, and welcome to the Coaching Crowd podcast with me, Jo Wheatley, and my friend and co host, Zoe Hawkins.
Hi, everybody. Good to be here for another episode. And this week we are continuing our six principle series. And we're bringing you the principle that emotions are not always authentic. And this one's a bit of a head scratcher. So we're going to take some time to explain what that means and also share with you some examples and just why it's really important for any foundational coaching training to have a basic understanding of emotions and an interest really in where those emotional journeys can take your clients. So where would you begin, Jo?
I think we'll kind of dive straight into it. So, when you ask your client how they're feeling about their goal or how they're arriving to the session, how are you feeling? Like any context in the conversation for how somebody's feeling, I think you can be useful to have an awareness that the emotion that the client shares with you might be what they think that they are feeling, but it might not be the full story. So there may be an emotional experience that we would call an authentic emotional experience, which sits behind the initial emotion that the client is feeling. So let me give you an example of that. Let's say a client has been taking actions to make progress towards their goal. They come back to the next session and you ask, they're checking in and they're explaining that things haven't quite gone to plan, and you're asking them how they feel about that, and they say, I feel gutted. I just feel gutted. Tell me more about that. Client says, I just feel really frustrated. I'm just really frustrated that I'm putting the effort in and I'm trying to be brave and I'm not getting anywhere with it. And you start to explore the frustration with the client. Or some coaches will go straight back into the actions, but let's say you're spending time with the emotions. If you feel, sometimes you'll just feel that there isn't any progress to be made in that particular area. So we would encourage you to get curious around, maybe there's a different emotion sitting underneath this, and this is where the work needs to take place. So in the example I'm giving, it might be that the client actually feels sad, like sad that their efforts haven't been rewarded, sad that the changes that they've tried to make have not been accepted by the other people that they need support from in order to make that progress. And so, if you're able to help the client to identify that actually there's this other feeling that they hadn't realized that they were feeling, all of a sudden you'll often see a client starts to feel relieved because they can start to understand their emotional experience, and then they can start to do something with that. So I'm going to pause on that example and see how you want to build on it. So,
Well, I think the important lesson, I suppose, to take from this is not to take anything at face value when it comes to emotions, because emotions are complicated. The next principle we talk about is how emotions are interlinked. And with this concept of emotions not being authentic, some of that is self-awareness building as well. It's really helping the client to think about, reflect on, and understand their emotions beyond face value. We've said before, most people can only really name or think about sort of seven core emotions. And emotions are intricate, and we can often experience several emotions all at once. And so when you start to put these principles together and you think about emotions, it's no reason that people can be confused by the emotional experience they're having or disconnected from the emotional experiences they're having, because they don't always easily make sense. And we aren't necessarily taught the skills of how to make sense of our emotional experiences. And therefore, we will often develop other strategies like pushing them to one side or getting overwhelmed by them. And so these principles, and this one in particular, the emotions are not authentic, just helps us to take a pause with our clients and help them to dig around and understand, is that all that is happening for you right now? Like, what else is occurring? And these are not unfamiliar questions. So when you ask somebody about that, their goal or the progress they're making, as you gave an example of there, you will often ask, what else? Tell me more about that. And this time we're doing it in the context of emotions. So what else are you feeling? Tell me more about that emotional experience. Where are you feeling that? Is that familiar? Is that new? And these questions just help the client to get to know themselves in the context of their emotions.
I think sometimes a clue can be that the client themselves feels confused about how they're feeling about something. It's almost like they're sort of stuck in a part of an emotional sequence and they need to kind of complete that. They don't even know they're in this kind of sequence of it. So if you're listening, a question I think that can be helpful to bring this to life is, what is the most authentic emotional experience you've ever had? So because to start to understand a concept, it can be useful to relate it to yourself. And so when am just thinking about that, an example comes into my mind where I'd had some news about something that had been ongoing for quite a long time, and there were lots of different emotions attached to it. And when you're going about your everyday life, it's easy to stay in the more kind of emotions maybe that are sort of safer to experience or express, when you're around other people. And I remember then, as soon as when I was on my own, and it's almost like my body, everything about me knew, now I can actually allow myself to feel the real emotion, whatever it was that was going to come. Wasn't sure what that would be. And I remember having tears in the car and then literally just having to sit down in the shower when I got home. And I was really, really sad and really, but I was like, that was authentic. I know that was really authentic, no mask. That was pure emotion and an emotional processing, which actually is a great thing, as much as it can be uncomfortable at the time, but it also can be reassuring. And often when people go through a process in their life and a part of it, if you like, is coming to a conclusion, that's often where you'll get these kind of cluster of emotions. So when I ask that question, what is the most authentic emotional experience you've ever had? You notice if there's a familiarity of, so there is a difference between authentic and inauthentic because I knew how to answer that question. And so, as you were saying, Zoe, other ways to kind of check this out are there any emotions that you tend to deny yourself? And if there's a part of you, as you're listening to this, that thinks, yes, probably, even if you can't put a name to the emotions, but there's just an internal and innate understanding that, yes, I have this kind of relationship to that, then perhaps you can start to see how this principle could play out with coachees in a coaching scenario.
I think what your example does there, Joe, is it touches on why it's important to identify these authentic emotions. And the key of this is, if you can't identify the authentic emotion, you can't process the emotion.
Mm.
So you're busy trying to process the surface emotions, the anger, perhaps the guilt, the shame, whatever. But if it's sadness that is this authentic emotion that you're unaware of, it's hard to shift whatever experience or feeling you're having if you can't get into contact with what is really authentic to you. And it's not to say that you aren't experiencing those surface emotions, because you obviously are. If you're having the experience and those emotions are coming through, it's almost like you can't complete a jigsaw until you've got the missing piece. And what we're sort of sharing with you here is those authentic emotions are often the missing piece. They are often the emotions that you're less in contact with, or, as you alluded to there, Joe, are less acceptable for you to experience.
Mm.
And there is some sort of conditioning that can happen that bring these authentic emotions to light. So, for example, big generalization that when girls grow up, it's less acceptable for them to demonstrate anger than it is sadness. When boys grow up, it's less acceptable for them to experience sadness than it is anger. And, those are sweeping generalizations that be different across cultures. But it gives you an indication of, like, so what was my upbringing, and what emotions in my caregiving environment were welcomed and what were less welcome. And that might give you an understanding around what are some of the emotions, therefore, that I may not be fully present with or able to contact. So those are some, not so saying you ask that directly of your client, but starting with self, because when you as yourself can identify that you have these authentic emotions that you express less often, it will help you to understand that your clients do and what it's like when they find them, but also different ways for you to be able to access them with your clients when you've had the experience yourself of being able to find yours.
It's kind of like breaking down this myth, if you like, that when an event happens, we feel one emotion in response to it. And I think somehow that seems to be what we grow this concept. No, people don't say it, but it kind of is how things are. And actually, what we talk about is, when an event happens, we will have an initial response to it. And so that is a direct response of experiencing that event or that trigger. And then and those are important because we then start to make a decision as to what we're going to do next based on the emotional response that we have to that situation. But then there are secondary emotions. So those are emotions that we feel in response to the first feeling that we had. And that's when people can get confused about their emotional experiences. Now, if there's a really quick progression from that first emotion into the second or the third emotion based on that, people can forget or not even realize that they had that first response. And so what happens in coaching when we pay attention and we have the confidence and the capability to do it is we can help our clients to really unpick and decipher their emotional experience so that they can identify and make sense of that process. And the purpose of that is to be able to help them, get closure on things, make decisions that are going to serve them in the way that's most useful to them, and so they can move ahead with confidence around that.
Well, that's the key. It's about action. And I think this is the myth, I think, around the emotions coaching. Oh, it's all fluffy and you're going to spend too much time talking about how you feel. And the reality is when you talk about how you feel and you understand these sort of hidden depths to your emotions, moving forward is much quicker because you don't have to push against things that are stuck or in the way. You're able to dissolve them through the ability to see what's there and talk about them. So, I do think that emotions coaching accelerates coaching in many ways because it helps your clients to really understand what they need and how they can have those needs met as well.
Like if a coachee or a client takes action based on like the secondary emotion because they don't really know they didn't make full contact with that first emotion, that's where they can feel like an emptiness, like the need associated with that first emotion hasn't been met. So if you think about people in jobs that, on paper, they've achieved everything that they want to, but actually there's a feeling of emptiness, dissatisfaction, unfulfillment. There is an unmet need there. How do you help your clients to discover what that is? If that's what their goal is they want to feel fulfilled in their life, you might find that the key lies within some of this content.
Mm. And I think also, as I've been listening, Joe, one of the things that we haven't explicitly mentioned is how seemingly contradictory emotions can sit side by side. So you can simultaneously experience joy and sadness, connected to even the same event. And I think sometimes that confuses people. And whilst you're experiencing these simultaneous events, there may be, as you say, another emotion that sort of sits underneath all of those things. So I guess as we started, it's don't take anything at face value. Honor your clients by spending time and helping them to deepen and understand their emotional experiences in order to be in service of them and the goal that it is that they are looking to achieve.
Yeah, and we so far we've only been focusing on a client talking about their experience, but obviously clients don't, as individuals, we don't exist in a vacuum. Our whole lives are spent in conversation with other people or interactions with other people. And, often clients will bring situations that involve conflict into the coaching space because, it's emotionally charged for them. It doesn't fit within their kind of ideal version of their life. So if you imagine that you've got two people in dialogue that's become a conflict, actually, what if they are both, trying to resolve it, but what's happening is they're both communicating from their inauthentic feeling place. So let's say a client says, "Oh, I think my boss is really angry with me because of this," or somebody in another team that you've got to work with. Let's say it's a matrix style organization. They're really angry with me because I didn't deliver on this thing. And, and I feel like they're not listening to, what I'm saying. But actually, neither party really knows what's underneath it. And the emotions underneath it could be fear, or boredom, or whatever it is. And you can only resolve conflict when both parties are able to identify and articulate what the authentic emotion is and to understand what the unmet need is. Then you have fertile grounds to be able to resolve that conflict and move forwards in a healthy way. Conflict itself is, of course, not a bad thing, but it's about how you are able to engage in that way. So, another example that you're likely to have show up in a coaching conversation.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that emotions are everywhere. All coaching is about emotions, whether that is about, as you said, the unfulfillment that you may experience in your career, or the fear of achieving a goal, or the sadness at not making progress, or the frustration at hitting obstacles. Like, emotions are everywhere in your coaching conversations, and an absolute fundamental skill when you're learning to be a coach or you're thinking about starting out as a coach is to get a understanding of where emotions feature in coaching conversations and how to handle them in the ethics of a professional coach. And if you're somebody at the start of your coaching journey looking to find a great course that's going to equip you to have conversations with your clients about all kinds of topics, including emotions, do come and look at our coaching training. And you may be wondering which coaching course is right for you. And we have a quiz for that at mycoachingcourse.com. So come and do that quiz to help you to figure out which coaching course is right for you at mycoachingcourse.com. And if emotions coaching is on your agenda for some CPD, then come and take a look at that at igcompany.com/emotions coaching.